one of our favorite speakers here. Mel Horvath-Lucid has been a friend to Unity for a long, long time. Every time she comes, we're spiritually enlightened. It's so wonderful. And today she's been going to talk about fall, but she's been with us through the other seasons of the year too. So she's brought us through each season. This is the fall season, the wisdom of fall. She sent me a little bit about herself this morning. I'm just going to read from my email. Mel, of course, is a friend of Unity, a wild, creative, and lifelong learner. She shows up in her work as an interfaith spiritual director and is an ordained minister in the spiritualist tradition and works in restorative justice with a focus on how we can do things differently towards love, towards peace, and towards healing. At her core, she cares about creating bigger spaces for belonging and seeks to challenge folks to begin from within. So with that, I'll shut down my slides and welcome Mel. We're delighted to have you here.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it is kind of cool to think that we're reflecting now. I started with talking about spring and what seeds are we planting, and this idea of leading from a mindset of love rather than fear. Then we moved to the wild, unruly of summer, and we watched those intentions that we planted grow metaphorically and literally. And now we find ourselves coming into the fall. And so I want to invite us into the wisdom of fall. So the idea of fall that I really want to bring us into today is this idea of now the harvest, and the idea of harvesting from a place of love, reflection, awareness, and that those aspects of the self are really calling us into spiritual maturity. And I've said this quote before, but I'll share it again. It's by Wayne Teasdale from the book Mystic Heart. He says, "It is not what we do, it is how well and fast we can integrate with what is." It is not what we do, it is how well and fast we can integrate with what is. And so, this harvest season, for me, I'd like to orientate us back toward this deep relationship with self and maybe an increased understanding of what we're moving toward through fall and back into winter again. And so when I was writing this morning's talk, I ended up hearing a song I've heard a million times before by Neil Young, Harvest Moon. And in part, I would want to invite us back into, you'll hear the song at the end today, into this idea of this song being sung to self, a love affair with self. And so as I moved through considering aspects of this service, I started to consider what aspects of ourselves do we treat as a stranger and watch from afar? And what aspects of ourselves do we hold as lovers with all our heart? And what might it look like for us to really, really grow in maturity of how we hold the space between those aspects of ourselves back into this idea of really wanting to see ourselves dance again and love again and be wholesome in whatever it is we decide to harvest. And so the part of the song that really sort of kicked me in my rear end a little bit was this idea of just like children sleeping, we could dream this night away. And in my own personal journey, I've shared before, I oftentimes speak from my growing edge, not from what I think I know. I speak more times from what I'm certain I don't know. And I've noticed with myself the affinity I've had towards the Care Bears my whole life, and how that's been almost problematic. And about a year ago in counseling, I was talking to my therapist and I said, sometimes I feel like a little Care Bear with a sword that I'm afraid to wield, and I'm just dragging it on the ground. And when I was looking for a picture to depict this little sad bear of why don't people care? Why don't they care? And there's nothing I can do in this narrative that's within me in this aspect of self. And then the other side of me, the best picture I could find to depict that also looks sad and is also holding a sword and is like, fine, I will fight, and I will fight, and I will fight. And how tiring that feeling is. And my therapist said to me, what would it look like if you put down the sword? And it took me literally a year of reflecting to notice that my own posture in life was that I was always carrying a sword. And what would it look like for me to put it down? But what I noticed as I played with this idea of putting down the sword, that I really had this immature idea of what collective functioning would look like. And we would all stand together and we would all shine from our unique brightness, and that would change the world. And it's a beautiful thought, but it's also a dream because it requires from others something in order for me to show up as myself. So I want to talk more about that today. As we go through the fall season and come into winter, we're going to be running in again to a unity ritual of the 12 powers. And this ritual really invites us into a refining and a distilling down to one capacity of 12 that we really, really want to focus in on. And these capacities are available to us, however, all year round. And so I want to imagine now that we're coming out of the unruly of summer, and there's wisdom abound, there's love abound, there's strength, faith, imagination, order, understanding, will, power, zeal, release, and life itself, breathing like an organism there in us, around us. And right now, we're being invited into the practice continually of whatever our intention is. And we're also being called to refine it. And for me, part of this is understanding a distillation process. And distillation, in part, calls us to have different quantities of different things in different moments. And that can either be done consciously or unconsciously, meaning we meet an experience in our life and we show up in certain ways, and those are either conscious or unconscious. So the 12 powers, well, the ritual is once a year and really leans deeply into this idea of intention. What container? Maybe it's a container of imagination, but that all these other capacities are there and they work together. They are not in isolation of one another, but rather in collaboration. And so we can paint the life that we want by focusing and understanding and cultivating, practicing these 12 spiritual powers. So, what are we taking from the harvest? And with distillation, it's the act of purifying a liquid. And I think about our very selves as being at least 70% water through the process of heating and cooling. And this maturing means that sometimes we find ourselves frustrated by the reality of meeting resistance or meeting things that challenge us to again look within, to again self-assess, to become more aware of our own selves, and then to the extraction of the essential meaning or the most important aspect of something. So I want to call us into this idea of spiritual maturity and conscious relationship, being aware in relationship. And so conscious relationship is a relationship to self. And in this world, we're oftentimes taught to spiral out away from ourselves to get validation from the things that we do, how we are with others, who others tell us to be, and how well we do those things. And part of the spiritual maturing is coming back into relationship with self, which calls us into a gentler reflection of self, a holding of self-love. Love is a mindset toward ourselves, and to care for ourselves, perhaps in the way that we would have longed for from parents. Maybe some of us experienced that from our caregivers, and maybe some of us didn't, and we figure out how to become that now for ourselves. Another key piece of conscious relationship is the ability to self-soothe, that I can look within that I can earth and ground and root myself in those 12 powers, and that the practice of them, this practice of standing in my truth in that way, brings me peace in moments that are anything but. So my own practice becomes a space of being able to hold whatever is in front of me. Emotional intelligence. It is not just enough to be able to say, well, I'm feeling what I'm feeling. It is quite another to notice that, and then to lean into our values, our morals, our ethics anyway. And so we start to prioritize self-love and care, but that isn't selfish in the way that we've been taught it might be. We continue to, or begin to communicate needs and wants with love, without weaponizing affection. We start to see those times where we bump into one another as kind of like neurons passing data and information. You got to get close enough to bump into one another. But oftentimes we're so afraid of bumping, ouch, that might hurt, that we won't come close enough to see our reflection in the eyes of another, to have those conversations. Or we've not leaned into this trust of self, that we can trust ourselves to respond to handle whatever it is that's in front of us from this place of spiritual maturity. We become committed in conscious relationship to understanding our own mind, our own heart, our own being, our own soul. And then for me, we meet some of the radicalization of this world by practicing radical self-compassion and acceptance and love. And in that, we start to grow and reopen our space to be with another in what they're going through. So I want to redefine autonomy. And I'm redefining this in part based on a really, really powerful conversation with one of my Indigenous circle teachers, Tanaga, about 2 years ago. And I went to Tanaga, and at that point, I was really struggling with truths that I'd come to understand about myself. And, I said, like, what happens once you do understand these truths about yourself? And she said this. She said, well, first of all, most of us will not touch in to the truth of who we are, because that will hurt. It will suck. You will find out that you're human and flawed, that you are capable of great harm and great healing all in one breath. You will realize how powerful you are. You will come to realize those 12 powers are accessible to you at all times, and that you have a choice. And that the shift to really understanding with great freedom comes great responsibility will mean that you understand that how you show up is vital, and it will impact things. And so most of us won't, she said, touch in to the pain of self-work, self-reflection, self-analysis. And if we do, most of us will miss to do that with great love, with tenderness, with care, slowly and gently with ourselves. And as we practice that inwardly, we grow our capacity towards authentic compassion with others. And so she says, in absence of that, then, for those of us that do that work, we're then going to come to some truths. And what I've learned about truth is that it will require nothing of anyone else for you to stand well in it. You will be able to sleep at night when you reflect and you look at how you've shown up. And somehow truth has a texture, a rootedness that holds steady in the storm in a way that those external ways of our being don't. And so then from there, if we do decide to do this real deep self-work and spiritual maturing, we then will go out and need to test our truth against collective truth and be ready to shift and change and grow again. Deepening and deepening and strengthening and strengthening. Changing and choosing on repeat over and over from a place of actual autonomy. And so I hear this word autonomy being thrown around a lot in the work that I do. And I'm starting to understand that we might have misunderstood it. Because it seems to me that we're understanding autonomy of I have my right to my feelings, my beliefs, my thoughts, absolutely you do. Absolutely you do. And That is like a little tiny aspect of a very big part of autonomy. So I want to redefine autonomy. Autonomy is actually a self-assessing capacity, which is part of the reason why some of us struggle with it. If we've abandoned ourselves, people pleasing, or looking for validation externally, the idea of standing in your own roots with responsibility for how you show up on your own, independent of how others show up, that stuff's scary. We run from that. We're like, no, 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 no. Where's the pack? Or just tell me what to do. And so this self-assessing of true, deep spiritual maturity and autonomy in this big picture is that we presence, we notice our own thoughts, our own feelings, our beliefs, our morals, our ethics, how they're interacting with the broader world. And we self-assess and make a choice to ask if I am operating right now out of my own moral and ethical integrity over a momentary desire. So we self-assess, meaning, am I showing up with the greater ethical and moral beliefs that I've said I value in moments where I'd prefer not to? That is autonomy redefined. And so it is not enough to say, I have the right to, and not realize we have impact for everything that we do. And for me, that's where the 12 powers and getting down to what's one thing I want to practice really well. And if it's joy, what does cultivating joy as a discipline look like? What does love as a mindset look like? And these powers then start to override the fears that would hold us back. And it calls us into those moments where what I noticed in preparing for this talk, it took me a heck of a long time to find only one Care Bear shooting its power into the world. And in part because if you watched the Care Bears, if you're a 90 baby like me, it was about the only channel that I could watch. And so it was on repeat. What you'll learn is that at some points, the Care Bear is shooting its ray and it recognizes it's not strong enough on its own. It requires other people. And I would suggest that what it actually requires is other people to be in their own autonomy, showing up with their values and morals. And that we've been taught not to trust ourselves. We've been taught to look outside of ourselves, but we know if we're showing up like jerks. We know if we are, and it will sit as unsettled within us. Because ultimately, even if we try to excuse away our own behavior and our own ways of being, there is aspects of ourselves, and we know that to be true, that hold a higher integrity, that know how we want to show up and be in the world. And so it takes a refining and a distillation of what powers need to show up right now. And am I doing that? Whether I'm alone, shooting my ray from my belly, or whether I'm with others. And either way, the maturing for me has been to put down the sword. To put down the sword and pick up powers far greater than whatever wielding I think I'm going to do. And start to call myself back into integrity, back into my own morals and my own ethics for how I want to show up and be in the world. And that stuff's hard work. So my question for you today to consider is, how much force does it take to throw you off your own center? Because really that's a worthy question, right? Hey, I believe in love as a mindset, but only if other people are loving. Hey, I believe in kindness, but not if you're going to be mean to me. And so it calls us into this maturing because as far as I can tell, love has infinite forms. And I have loved folks effectively from a balcony. And I've loved folks up close. And I have grieved capacity differences between myself and others. And that goes both ways. Times when I just couldn't quite be or give what would have been maturity in that moment. But if you find yourself in those hot spaces of distillation, getting knocked off your center easily, those are a gift. Those are showing you what what the universe, what source, what God is calling us back to, which is those powers within ourselves that are present all the time. And so as we move into a time of meditation today, I want to invite you to consider the aspects of yourself that you treat as though they're a stranger. And what might they need? And those aspects of yourself that you have maybe loved with all your heart, but never assessed why. And what distillation of powers that are readily available to you is your journey calling you into right now? That potent mix of whatever needs to be in your gut, your heart, your soul. What is that would have you standing in those moments of fear and trepidation and uncertainty with stillness? What would it take to be within you to put down that sword and hold steady in that storm, to see the aspects of you as connected, to explore your own roots, the trunk of who you are, the branches that reach, the leaves that flow and fall, those changing aspects of yourself, and to reflect upon the journey that's calling us all back to our hearts. So I invite you to take a deep cleansing breath, perhaps softening your gaze or closing your eyes. To remember, this is your sacred journey toward yourself, to your soul, to your heart. Will you let your soul be stirred by sacred encounters, inviting you into the continual process of distillation, reflection, like fall landscapes reflected in the water? Will you look? Will you let yourself be seen in the mirrors of eyes that remind you that you are soulfully connected, human and magnificent, all in the same breath? To let these moments challenge you back toward your most powerful self. It is our journey that we seek, yet so many times we abandon this quest. Allow the forces around us to throw us off our center, to shake the roots of who we know ourselves to be, truly be. Fearing leaving the comforts of the illusion of home, of the known. But the soul calls us toward adventure, into our aliveness, challenges us through hot and cold, pulls and squeezes to know who we really are, in the calm, in the storm. Moments where nobody stands with us. Moments where everyone appears to be on our side. We grow in maturity to stand independent in something else, something greater. We become willing to know ourselves, to call in the stranger of self, that aspect othered that we've watched from afar, and to invite it again to the table of our own heart. To inquire into that which we call lover within ourselves, to stretch this care forward and out, to hold more again. What is that stranger aspect of you meant to teach you? What is the lover that you love with all your heart meant to uncover? Breathing into the silence. Life experiences, dreams, callings. There has got to be something more. When we listen, the channel opens into our soul print, and possibilities bloom and paths appear. Open the channel. Let yourself flow in.